Chapter 1. The Logic of Nancy Mathews. Nancy Mathews believed in logic the way some people believed in fate. For her, life wasn't a string of cosmic accidents leading to soulmates and fireworks. It was a series of choices, deliberate and grounded. Actions mattered. Words were nice, but they were cheap. At 26, Nancy had heard every variation of "you're too picky" from friends who thought settling was a virtue. She didn't argue. Why waste breath explaining that she wasn't chasing love like a rom-com heroine sprinting through an airport? She wasn't bitter either. Her dating history was short, neat, and mercifully free of drama. She weeded out the obvious players before they got a foot in the door. Flashy arrogance? Hard pass. Designer labels and curated charm? No thank you. What Nancy wanted was simple, though apparently rare. A man who could stand on his own, who didn't need her to complete him but chose her anyway. Someone who could look her in the eyes at the end of a long day and still decide to stay. For that kind of man, Nancy would fight. But she wasn't in a hurry. Quality beat quantity every time. Her apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon and pine, courtesy of the candle flickering on the coffee table. Outside, December had draped the city in frost, and the streets glittered under strings of Christmas lights. Nancy sat cross-legged on the couch, laptop balanced on her knees, scrolling through gift ideas for her parents. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend, Claire. Claire, found your unicorn yet? If yes, tell him to bring friends. Nancy snorted and typed back. Nancy, still grazing in the meadow of reality. No unicorns in sight. Seconds later, Claire called. Nancy answered on speaker. Meadow of reality? Claire's voice was bright with laughter. You make dating sound like a wildlife documentary. It practically is, Nancy said, closing her laptop. Observe the male in his natural habitat, sending unsolicited gym selfies. Claire cackled. You're impossible. Seriously, though, don't you ever get tired of being single during the holidays? Nope. Nancy stretched her legs. I like my own company, and I don't have to share my peppermint bark. True, but imagine sharing it with someone who actually deserves it. Nancy rolled her eyes. Deserve is a strong word. Fine. Someone who doesn't make you want to fake a Wi-Fi outage mid-date. That would be refreshing, Nancy admitted. Claire sighed dramatically. One day, Nancy Mathews, you'll meet a man who checks all your boxes. And when you do, I expect a parade. Keep waiting, Nancy said lightly. I'm not lowering my standards just to have a +1 at Christmas. Your standards aren't the problem, Claire said. Your patience is terrifying. Nancy smiled. Better terrified than divorced. Claire groaned. You and your statistics. They're real, Nancy said, standing to refill her mug with hot chocolate. Divorce rates aren't exactly encouraging. Maybe not, but love isn't a math problem. Tell that to my accountant, Nancy teased. Claire laughed again, then softened. Seriously, though, you deserve someone good. I know, Nancy said simply, and I'll wait for him. They chatted a few more minutes before hanging up. Nancy curled back onto the couch, sipping her cocoa, feeling perfectly content. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly guess, was that the man she was waiting for wasn't a stranger at all. Chapter 2. The Unexpected Invitation. Nancy's phone buzzed again the next morning, this time with a message from her mother. Mom, Christmas dinner at our place. Sunday, 6 p.m. Don't make other plans. Nancy smiled. Her mother's texts were less invitations and more royal decrees. She typed back, Nancy, wouldn't dream of it. A second later, another bubble appeared. Mom, the Harlows will be there. Vincent too. Nancy paused mid-sip of her coffee. Vincent Harlow. That was a name she hadn't heard in years. Not since college, when family vacations had stopped being mandatory and life had gotten busy. She remembered Vincent vaguely. Tall, quiet, always polite. The kind of guy who listened more than he spoke. Back then, she'd been too focused on exams and internships to notice much else. Nancy shrugged and set her mug down. So what? It was just dinner. Family friend, nothing more. Her phone rang. Claire again. Guess who's coming to dinner? Nancy said by way of greeting. Brad Pitt. Claire guessed. Close. Vincent Harlow. There was a beat of silence. Then Claire squealed so loudly Nancy had to hold the phone away. Oh my God, Vincent? The guy from your parents' vacation photos? The one who looked like he stepped out of a GQ ad even in cargo shorts. Nancy laughed. He was 15. Calm down. And now he's 27, Claire said, voice dripping with implication. Single. Apparently. Claire gasped theatrically. Nancy, this is fate. Nancy groaned. Don't start. I'm just saying, Claire continued, undeterred. You've known him forever. He's basically pre-screened. No serial killer vibes, no weird ex-drama. That you know of. Nancy cut in. Fine, but still. This is promising. It's dinner, Nancy said firmly. Not a Hallmark movie. Claire snorted. Keep telling yourself that. Meanwhile, wear something festive. Red looks good on you. Nancy rolled her eyes but smiled. Goodbye, Claire. She hung up and stared at her calendar. Sunday. 2 days away. Plenty of time to find something festive that didn't scream I'm trying too hard. Sunday arrived with a sky the color of pewter and a wind that nipped at Nancy's cheeks as she walked up her parents' driveway. The house glowed with warm light, wreaths on the windows and a towering tree visible through the living room bay window. Nancy rang the bell, and her mother swept the door open. All holiday cheer and cranberry red sweater. There's my girl. Her mother hugged her tight, then stepped back to appraise her outfit. You look lovely. Thanks, Nancy said, brushing snow from her coat. Everyone's in the living room, her mother said, ushering her inside. Go say hello. Nancy slipped off her boots and walked toward the hum of conversation. The Harlows were there as promised. Mr. and Mrs. Harlow chatting with her father near the fireplace. And then there was Vincent. Nancy stopped in the doorway, momentarily startled. He wasn't the lanky teenager she remembered. Vincent had filled out. Broad shoulders, easy posture, dark hair that looked like it had been tousled by the wind. He wore a charcoal sweater and jeans, simple but sharp. And when he turned at the sound of her footsteps, his eyes, gray, steady, met hers with a flicker of recognition and something else she couldn't name. Nancy, he said, voice low and warm. It's been a while. Years, she said, stepping forward. Hi, Vincent. He smiled, slow and genuine. Hi, Mrs. Harlow beamed. Look at you two, all grown up. Nancy laughed lightly, feeling oddly self-conscious. Time does that. Vincent chuckled, and the sound tugged at something in her chest. They exchanged the usual pleasantries. Work, life updates, the weather, before her mother called everyone to the dining room. Dinner was lively, full of laughter and clinking glasses. Nancy found herself seated next to Vincent, which she suspected was no accident. Her mother had a matchmaking streak a mile wide. So, Vincent said as they passed the rolls, still in the city? Yep, Nancy said. Marketing firm. Keeps me busy. Sounds like you like it. I do, she said, surprised by how easily the truth came out. What about you? Architecture, he said. Mostly residential projects. Nancy blinked. That's impressive. Vincent shrugged, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. I like building things people can live in. Feels tangible. Nancy nodded, intrigued despite herself. There was something grounding about the way he said it, no bravado, just quiet certainty. They talked through dinner, slipping into easy conversation about books, travel, and the absurdity of holiday commercials. Vincent had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard more than once, making her laugh until her cheeks hurt. By the time dessert rolled around, Nancy realized she hadn't checked her phone in hours. When the evening wound down, coats were fetched and goodbyes exchanged. Vincent lingered near the door as Nancy pulled on her gloves. Good to see you again, he said, his tone casual but his gaze steady. You too, Nancy said, and meant it. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily under the porch light. Nancy walked to her car, her breath clouding in the cold, her mind unexpectedly restless. It was just dinner, she told herself. Just Vincent. So why did it feel like the start of something? Chapter 3. Vincent arrives. Monday morning dawned crisp and white, the kind of winter day that looked perfect from behind glass but bit like a wolf the moment you stepped outside. Nancy woke early, her mind still replaying snippets of last night. Vincent's quiet humor, the way he listened without rushing to fill silences, the steadiness in his gaze. She shook it off. It was just dinner. Pleasant evening, nothing more. Her phone buzzed as she poured coffee. Claire, of course. Claire. So? Bill. Nancy sighed and typed back. Nancy. Dinner was nice. Everyone's alive. No scandals. Seconds later, Claire called. Nice? That's all you've got? Claire demanded. Nancy laughed. What do you want me to say? He was polite. We talked. Talked about what? Books. Architecture. Christmas commercials. Claire groaned. Nancy, you're killing me. Was there chemistry? Nancy hesitated, staring at the steam curling from her mug. I don't know. You don't know? Claire's voice rose an octave. Either your stomach did a backflip or it didn't. Nancy smiled faintly. Maybe a somersault. Claire squealed. That's something. Did he ask for your number? No. Did you give him yours? No. Claire groaned again. You're hopeless. Nancy chuckled. It was family dinner, not speed dating. Fine, Claire said, exhaling dramatically. But if he texts you, promise you'll tell me. Promise, Nancy said, amused. They hung up, and Nancy tried to focus on work, but Vincent's voice kept threading through her thoughts. Low, even, with that dry humor that sneaked up on her like a punchline whispered in confidence. By Thursday, the city was bracing for a snowstorm. Nancy left the office early, weaving through crowds of shoppers burdened with glossy bags. Her phone buzzed again, this time her mother. Mom, change of plans. Storm's coming. We're doing an early Christmas dinner tomorrow night instead of Sunday. Everyone's staying over. Roads might be bad. Nancy blinked at the message. Staying over? She typed back. Nancy, got it. I'll pack a bag. Her mother sent a thumbs-up emoji, followed by a snowflake. Nancy stared at her phone, pulse ticking faster than she liked. If Vincent was coming, and he probably was, that meant hours of proximity. Overnight proximity. She told herself it didn't matter. She was an adult. He was an adult. It was just logistics. Still, when she packed her overnight bag later, she spent an unreasonable amount of time debating between two sweaters. Friday evening, the storm arrived like a curtain dropping, thick snow swirling under streetlights, wind rattling windows. Nancy drove carefully, tires crunching over powder, until her parents' house came into view, glowing like a beacon against the gray. Inside, warmth and laughter spilled from the living room. Nancy shrugged off her coat, stamping snow from her boots, and followed the sound. Vincent was there. He stood near the fireplace, talking with her father, a glass of something amber in his hand. His sweater was navy this time, sleeves pushed up just enough to reveal strong forearms. His hair was damp at the ends, as if he'd just come in from the snow. Nancy's pulse did that somersault again. Vincent looked up as she entered, and his smile was immediate, slow, sure, like he'd been expecting her. "Hey," he said, voice warm as the fire behind him. "Hey," Nancy replied, tugging off her gloves. "Made it through the blizzard." "Impressive," he said. "I was starting to think we'd need sled dogs." Nancy laughed, and the sound felt easy, natural. Her mother bustled in, cheeks pink from the kitchen heat. "You two get comfortable. Dinner's almost ready." Nancy settled on the couch, and Vincent joined her a moment later, leaving a polite space between them. The conversation flowed: holiday plans, favorite winter traditions, the absurdity of inflatable yard decorations. When dinner was served, they sat side by side again, and Nancy found herself looking forward to his quiet comments, the way he noticed details others missed. After dessert, the wind howled louder, and her father announced that the roads were officially a mess. "Everyone's staying put," he said cheerfully. "Guest rooms are ready." Nancy's stomach dipped. She glanced at Vincent, who met her gaze with calm amusement, as if reading her thoughts. "Looks like we're snowed in," he said softly. Nancy managed to smile. "Guess so." Later, when the house had settled into cozy chaos, her parents chatting with the Harlows, music playing low, Nancy found herself in the den, nursing a mug of cocoa. The fire crackled, shadows dancing on the walls. Vincent appeared in the doorway, hands in his pockets. "Mind if I join you?" "Not at all," Nancy said, shifting to make room. He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, mingling with the warmth of the fire. For a moment, they just listened to the wind battering the windows. Then Vincent spoke, his tone thoughtful. "You always seemed certain," he said. Nancy turned her head. "Certain? About what you want," he said. "Even when we were younger, you never followed the crowd." Nancy blinked, surprised he'd noticed. "I guess I've always had a plan." "Plans are good," Vincent said. "But sometimes the best things aren't planned." Nancy studied him, the firelight carving shadows across his face, and wondered if he was talking about snowstorms, or something else entirely. Chapter 4: The snowstorm curveball. The storm didn't let up. By midnight, the world outside was a blur of white, wind howling like a restless choir. Inside, the house was a cocoon of warmth, firelight flickering, the scent of cinnamon and pine threading through the air. Nancy stood at the window in the den, watching snow whip across the yard. Her reflection stared back at her. Loose sweater, hair tumbling over her shoulders, expression caught somewhere between calm and restless. Behind her, Vincent's voice broke the quiet. "Looks worse than they predicted." Nancy turned. He was leaning against the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking infuriatingly composed. "Worse is an understatement," she said. "Pretty sure my car's under a snowdrift by now." Vincent smiled faintly. "Guess you're stuck with us." Nancy laughed softly. "Guess so." He crossed the room and settled into the armchair opposite her. For a moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled, shadows dancing across the walls. Nancy perched on the edge of the couch, curling her fingers around her mug of cocoa. "You seem unbothered." "Snow doesn't bother me," Vincent said. "I like the quiet." Nancy tilted her head. "You always did." His gaze flicked to hers, steady and unreadable. "You noticed." She shrugged, a little self-conscious. "Hard not to. You were the only one who didn't talk just to fill the silence." Vincent's mouth curved in a slow smile. "Still true." Nancy felt something shift, subtle like the air warming by a degree. The evening stretched on, the house settling into a hush as her parents and the Harlows drifted off to bed. Nancy lingered in the den, reluctant to surrender the cozy glow of the fire. Vincent stayed too, as if neither wanted to break the spell. They talked about work, travel, the absurdity of holiday commercials. Vincent had a knack for slipping humor into unexpected places, making Nancy laugh until her cheeks hurt. At one point he asked, "So, what's your take on Christmas movies? Love Actually or Die Hard?" Nancy grinned. "Die Hard, obviously." Vincent chuckled. "Good answer." "Why?" she asked, amused. "Because it means you're practical," he said, eyes glinting. "And a little rebellious." Nancy laughed, shaking her head. Or maybe I just like explosions. Fair enough, Vincent said, smiling. The conversation flowed easily, like water finding its path. And yet, beneath the words, something else hummed. A quiet awareness, a pull Nancy hadn't felt in a long time. Around 1 a.m., the wind roared louder, rattling the windows. Nancy shivered and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Vincent noticed. Cold? A little, she admitted. Without a word, he stood, crossed to the hall, and returned with another blanket. He draped it over her gently, his fingers brushing her shoulder for the briefest moment. Thanks, Nancy said, her voice softer than she intended. Vincent sat back down, but his gaze lingered, steady and warm. For a heartbeat, the room felt smaller, the fire brighter, the silence charged. Nancy looked away, focusing on the flames. Her pulse ticked faster, and she hated that it did. She wasn't the type to get flustered over a man, especially not one she'd known half her life. But Vincent wasn't the boy from family vacations anymore. He was different. Or maybe she was just seeing him clearly for the first time. When they finally said goodnight, Nancy climbed the stairs to the guest room, her thoughts a tangled mess. She told herself to sleep, to stop overthinking. It was just a snowstorm, just Vincent. But as she lay in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside, one truth pressed against her ribs like a secret she wasn't ready to name. She wanted to know him better. Chapter 5 Conversations by the Fire. Morning came muted and white, the storm still swirling outside like a shaken snow globe. Nancy woke to the scent of coffee drifting up the stairs and the muffled hum of voices below. She dressed in jeans and a soft gray sweater, telling herself it was just another day, albeit one spent in a house packed with family and a man who seemed to occupy more space in her thoughts than she liked to admit. Downstairs, the living room glowed with firelight. Her parents were in the kitchen with the Harlows, debating whether cinnamon rolls counted as breakfast or dessert. Nancy poured herself coffee and slipped into the den, drawn by the quiet crackle of the fire. Vincent was already there. He sat on the couch, one arm draped casually along the back, a book open in his lap. His hair was slightly tousled, like he'd run a hand through it, and his sweater, dark green today, made his eyes look almost silver in the morning light. Nancy hesitated in the doorway. You're up early. Vincent looked up, his smile slow and easy. Couldn't sleep. The wind sounded like it was trying to break in. Nancy chuckled, crossing to the armchair opposite him. I thought the same thing. She curled into the chair, sipping her coffee, and for a moment they sat in companionable silence, the fire popping softly between them. What are you reading? She asked finally. Vincent held up the book, The Architecture of Happiness. Nancy raised a brow. That sounds philosophical. It is, he said, closing the book with a finger marking his place. About how spaces shape the way we feel. Nancy tilted her head. You believe that? Vincent's gaze held hers, steady and thoughtful. I think the right space can make you feel safe, or seen. Nancy felt something shift in her chest, subtle but undeniable. She looked away, focusing on the flames. Interesting. Vincent smiled faintly, as if he knew she was deflecting. What about you? What shapes how you feel? Nancy hesitated, then said, people, actions, not words. Vincent nodded slowly, like he understood more than she'd said. Actions matter. They do, Nancy said, her voice firmer now. Anyone can say the right thing. Doing it, that's different. Vincent leaned back, studying her with quiet intensity. You've thought about this a lot. Nancy laughed softly. You could say that. Because of bad experiences? He asked, not prying, just curious. No, Nancy said quickly. I've been lucky. I just don't want to be someone's accessory, or their safety net. I want a partner who stands on his own. Vincent's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Interest, maybe, or agreement. Makes sense. Nancy searched his face, wondering if he was humoring her or if he really understood. The silence stretched, warm and charged, until Vincent broke it with a wry smile. So, no unicorns? Nancy blinked, then laughed. Claire told you that, didn't she? Vincent's smile widened. She might have mentioned it. Nancy shook her head, amused. Figures. Vincent's gaze softened. For what it's worth, I think unicorns are overrated. Nancy grinned. Finally, something we agree on. The day unfolded slowly, the storm hemming them in. They played board games with the parents, helped in the kitchen, and laughed over a disastrous attempt at gingerbread houses. But every time Nancy caught Vincent's eye, across the table, in the hallway, by the fire, something unspoken hummed between them, like a thread pulling taut. Later, when the house quieted again, Nancy found herself back in the den, the fire painting gold across the walls. Vincent joined her without asking, settling on the couch beside her this time, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. They talked for hours about childhood memories, favorite books, the places they wanted to see. Vincent listened the way few people did, his attention steady, his questions thoughtful. And when he spoke, his words carried weight, like stones dropped into still water. At one point, Nancy asked, Why architecture? Vincent considered. Because it lasts. You build something and it stands long after you're gone. It matters. Nancy nodded slowly. I like that. Vincent's gaze lingered on her, and for a moment, the air felt different, thicker, charged. Nancy's pulse ticked faster, and she hated that it did. She wasn't the type to get swept up in moments. But this didn't feel like a sweep, felt like a slow, deliberate pull. When the clock chimed midnight, Vincent stood reluctantly. Guess we should call it a night. Nancy smiled faintly. Guess so. As he left, his hand brushed hers, light, almost accidental, but enough to send a spark racing up her arm. Nancy sat there long after he was gone, staring at the fire, her thoughts a tangled mess. She didn't believe in fate. She believed in choices. So why did this feel like the start of one? Chapter 6, The Christmas Market. By Saturday morning, the storm had loosened its grip, leaving the world blanketed in white and glittering under a pale winter sun. The roads were still slushy, but passable, and Nancy's parents announced their plan to visit the Christmas market downtown before the next round of snow rolled in. Nancy hesitated. Crowds weren't her favorite, and she'd been perfectly content with fireside quiet. But then Vincent said, I've never been to a Christmas market. His tone casual, almost curious, and suddenly Nancy found herself pulling on boots and a scarf. The drive was slow, tires crunching over icy patches, but the city was alive when they arrived. Strings of lights draped across stalls, carolers singing in harmonies that floated like snowflakes, the air thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts and cinnamon. Nancy stepped out of the car, breath puffing in the cold, and took it all in. It's like a postcard, she murmured. Vincent, beside her, smiled. Or a movie set. Nancy laughed. Don't start with the Hallmark jokes. Wouldn't dream of it, Vincent said, his eyes glinting with amusement. They wandered through the market together, weaving past stalls piled high with ornaments, handmade scarves, and jars of spiced jam. Nancy found herself relaxing, the festive chaos oddly soothing. Children darted past in puffy coats, their laughter ringing like bells, and somewhere nearby, a brass band struck up jingle bells. At one stall, Vincent paused to examine a carved wooden reindeer. You think this counts as rustic or kitsch? He asked, deadpan. Nancy grinned. Depends. Are you planning to put it on a mantle or in a snow globe? Vincent chuckled, setting the reindeer down. Fair point. They moved on, stopping for hot cider that steamed in their hands. Nancy sipped hers, savoring the warmth, and glanced at Vincent. He was watching the crowd, his expression thoughtful, like he was cataloging details no one else noticed. You do that a lot, she said before she could stop herself. Vincent turned to her. Do what? Observe, Nancy said, like you're storing everything away. His smile was slow, almost self-conscious. Old habit. From architecture? She guessed. From life, he said simply. Nancy studied him for a moment, wondering what else he'd noticed. About her, about this day, about the way her pulse ticked faster when his gaze lingered. They reached a stall selling ornaments, each one delicate and glittering like captured frost. Nancy picked up a glass sphere etched with tiny snowflakes. Pretty, she murmured. Vincent leaned closer to look, and for a moment their hands brushed. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a spark racing up Nancy's arm. She set the ornament down quickly, pretending to examine another. So, she said lightly, what's your verdict on Christmas markets? Vincent's mouth curved. Crowded, overpriced, surprisingly charming. Nancy laughed. That's almost a compliment. Almost. Vincent agreed, his eyes warm. They wandered on, drawn by the sound of music to a small square where couples skated on a temporary rink, their laughter mingling with the strains of a violin. Nancy watched, amused, until Vincent spoke. Ever skate? He asked. Nancy snorted. Once, in college. I spent more time on the ice than on my feet. Vincent's smile widened. Sounds like a challenge. Nancy narrowed her eyes. Don't even think about it. Too late, Vincent said, already heading toward the rental booth. Nancy groaned but followed, muttering under her breath. This is a terrible idea. 10 minutes later, she was wobbling on skates, clutching Vincent's arm like a lifeline. I warned you, she said through gritted teeth. Vincent chuckled, steady as a rock beside her. You're doing fine. I'm doing a slow-motion disaster, Nancy retorted, slipping again. Vincent caught her easily, his hands firm on her waist, and for a breathless moment, they were close, too close, the world narrowing to the heat of his touch and the steady calm in his eyes. Got you, he said softly. Nancy swallowed hard, her pulse thudding in her ears. Thanks. They skated, or rather, Vincent skated and Nancy clung, for another few minutes before surrendering to laughter and retreating to solid ground. Nancy's cheeks ached from smiling, her legs from the effort, but she felt lighter somehow, as if the cold had stripped away more than just tension. As dusk settled, the market shimmered under a canopy of lights, and Nancy found herself walking beside Vincent, their steps in sync, their conversation easy. When they reached the car, her parents busy loading bags into the trunk, Vincent glanced at her. Thanks for coming, he said quietly. Nancy blinked. You make it sound like I did you a favor. Vincent's smile was faint, almost private. Maybe you did. Nancy opened her mouth to reply, but her mother called her name, and the moment slipped away like breath on glass. On the drive home, Nancy stared out at the snow-dusted streets, her thoughts tangled. She didn't believe in fate. She believed in choices. But if today had been a choice, she wasn't sure whose it had been, or what it meant. Chapter 7 Friends Stir the Pot. Nancy had barely kicked off her boots when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and groaned. Claire. Of course. Claire. So, did you survive the snowpocalypse? Or did Vincent carry you through the blizzard like a romance novel hero? Nancy rolled her eyes and typed back. Nancy. We went to the Christmas market. It was fine. The 3 dots appeared instantly. Then, Claire. Fine? Fine? You went to a Christmas market with him and all you've got is fine? Nancy sighed, tossing her scarf onto the couch. Before she could reply, the phone rang. Fine. Claire's voice was scandalized. Nancy, you're killing me. Nancy laughed, sinking into the cushions. What do you want me to say? We walked around, drank cider, looked at ornaments. Did he buy you something? No. Did you buy him something? No. Claire groaned dramatically. You're hopeless. Nancy grinned. We did go ice skating. There was a beat of silence. Then Claire shrieked so loudly Nancy winced. Ice skating? Nancy Mathews, that is not fine. That is cinematic gold. Nancy laughed harder. It was a disaster. I nearly broke my neck. Did he catch you? Claire demanded. Nancy hesitated, remembering the feel of Vincent's hands steadying her, the warmth of his grip, the way his voice had softened when he said, Got you. Yes, she admitted. Claire squealed again. That's it. I'm calling Netflix. This is a holiday rom-com waiting to happen. Nancy groaned. Claire? No, listen, Claire barreled on. You've got the snowstorm, the family connection, the Christmas market, the skating rescue. What's next? A kiss under the mistletoe? Nancy's cheeks warmed despite herself. You're ridiculous. I'm visionary, Claire corrected. And you're in denial. Nancy laughed, shaking her head. It's not like that. Not yet, Claire said ominously. But it will be. Nancy ended the call before Claire could start planning a wedding hashtag. Later that evening, Nancy met up with her other 2 friends, Jenna and Marcy, for their annual holiday sanity check at a cozy cafe downtown. The place was strung with fairy lights, the scent of gingerbread thick in the air. Jenna slid into the booth first, her red scarf trailing like a banner. So, rumor has it you were snowed in with a certain Vincent Harlow. Nancy shot Claire a glare across the table. You talk too much. Claire grinned unrepentantly. I share joy. Marcy leaned forward, eyes bright. Is he as gorgeous as Claire says? Nancy sighed. He's Vincent. That's not an answer, Jenna said, smirking. Nancy stirred her latte, trying for casual. He's nice, quiet, funny, actually. Funny is good, Marcy said. Quiet is mysterious. Mysterious is hot. Nancy laughed. You sound like a dating app slogan. Seriously? Jenna said, propping her chin on her hand. You've known him forever. That's practically a background check. Exactly, Claire chimed in. No serial killer vibes. No weird ex-drama. He's perfect. Nancy shook her head. He's not perfect. He's just Vincent. Vincent who took you ice skating, Claire said sweetly. Nancy groaned. Why did I tell you that? Because deep down you want us to know, Jenna teased. Nancy rolled her eyes but smiled. It was nothing. I fell. He caught me. End of story. End of story? Marcy echoed. Honey, that's the beginning of a story. Nancy laughed, but her cheeks were warm, and she hated that they noticed. By the time she left the cafe, snow was falling again. Soft, lazy flakes drifting under streetlights. Nancy pulled her coat tighter and walked to her car, her friends' voices echoing in her head. Not yet, but it will be. She told herself they were wrong, that this was just holiday proximity, nothing more. But when her phone buzzed with a new message, her breath caught. Vincent. Made it home okay? Roads looked rough. Nancy stared at the screen, pulse ticking faster. Then she typed back, Nancy, home safe. Thanks for checking. 3 dots appeared. Then Vincent. Good. Thought I'd see if you wanted to grab coffee sometime. After the snow clears. Nancy's heart thudded. She stared at the words, the simplicity of them, the weight they carried. Coffee. Simple. Casual. A choice. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, and for the first time in a long time, Nancy felt something she couldn't explain. Something that wasn't logic or planning or statistics. She typed back, Nancy, I'd like that. Chapter 8, The Gift Exchange. The snow had eased by Monday, leaving the city glittering under a pale winter sun. Nancy woke to a quiet morning, her phone buzzing with work emails and one message that made her pulse skip. Vincent, still up for that coffee? Nancy stared at the screen, a smile tugging at her lips. She typed back, Nancy, absolutely. When? Vincent, tomorrow? There's a place near the park. Best peppermint mochas in town. Nancy hesitated only long enough to sip her coffee before replying. Nancy. Sounds perfect. Tuesday arrived crisp and bright, the kind of winter day that felt like a promise. Nancy dressed carefully, casual but not careless, and told herself it was just coffee. Just conversation. Nothing more. The cafe was cozy, strung with twinkling lights and garlands that smelled faintly of pine. Vincent was already there when she walked in, seated by the window, sunlight catching in his dark hair. He stood as she approached, his smile slow and warm. Hey, he said. Hey, Nancy replied, shedding her coat. You weren't kidding about the decorations. Vincent glanced around, amused. It's like Christmas exploded in here. Nancy laughed, settling across from him. Could be worse. At least there's caffeine. They ordered peppermint mochas, and when the mugs arrived, steaming, crowned with whipped cream, Nancy felt something loosen inside her. The conversation flowed easily, like it had by the fire, but lighter now, threaded with humor and the occasional spark that made her pulse tick faster. At one point, Vincent asked, So, what's your favorite holiday tradition? Nancy considered. Honestly, wrapping gifts while watching Die Hard. Vincent chuckled. Still loyal to the explosions. Always, Nancy said, grinning. What about you? Vincent's smile softened. Making something by hand. A gift that means something. Nancy tilted her head. That's thoughtful. Vincent shrugged, almost self-conscious. Feels more personal. Nancy studied him for a moment, wondering what kind of gifts he'd made, and for whom. Before she could ask, he reached into his coat pocket and slid a small box across the table. Nancy blinked. What's this? Consider it an early Christmas gift, Vincent said, his tone casual but his eyes steady. Nancy hesitated, then opened the box. Inside was a delicate silver ornament, etched with tiny snowflakes, and her initials, engraved in elegant script. Her breath caught. Vincent, this is beautiful. He smiled faintly. Figured you'd appreciate something that lasts. Nancy stared at the ornament, her chest tightening in a way that startled her. This wasn't flashy or generic. It was deliberate, personal, an action that spoke louder than any words. Thank you, she said softly. Really? Vincent's gaze held hers, warm and unwavering. You're welcome. They lingered over coffee, talking about everything and nothing, until the afternoon light began to fade. When they stepped outside, the air was sharp with cold, snow crunching underfoot. Vincent walked her to her car, his hands shoved into his pockets, his breath clouding in the chill. Drive safe, he said. Nancy smiled. Always. She slid into the driver's seat, but as she pulled away, her fingers brushed the ornament in her bag, and something inside her shifted, quiet, certain, undeniable. This wasn't fate. It was choice. And for the first time in a long time, Nancy wondered if she was ready to make one. Chapter 9, The Misunderstanding. Nancy was still smiling when she walked into her parents' house that evening, the ornament tucked safely in her bag like a secret. She'd planned to stay for dinner, just a quiet family night. But the moment she stepped inside, she realized quiet wasn't on the menu. The Harlows were back, and so was Vincent. He stood near the fireplace, talking with her father, his posture easy, his laugh low and warm. Nancy's pulse did that now familiar somersault, and she hated that it did. She wasn't a teenager. She wasn't supposed to get flustered over a man, especially one who'd just given her the most thoughtful gift she'd ever received. She slipped off her coat and joined her mother in the kitchen, trying to ignore the way Vincent's presence seemed to fill the house like heat from the fire. Dinner was lively, full of chatter and clinking glasses. Nancy found herself seated across from Vincent, which felt both deliberate and dangerous. Every time their eyes met, something unspoken hummed between them, a thread pulling taut. And then it happened. Mrs. Harlow, cheerful and oblivious, leaned forward with a smile. Vincent, dear, I'm so glad you're spending time with Nancy. Your mother and I were just saying how nice it is that you're keeping her company. Nancy froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Keeping her company. The words landed like a pebble in her chest, small but sharp. She forced a smile, but inside, something twisted. Was that what this was? Company? A favor? A polite gesture because their families were close? Vincent smiled politely at his mother, but Nancy barely registered his response. Her thoughts were spinning too fast, logic clawing at the edges of her calm. She told herself she wasn't chasing love. She told herself she wanted actions, not words. And Vincent had given her that, a gift that meant something, conversations that felt real. But if this was just family obligation, if he was here because it was convenient, then what did any of it mean? Nancy pushed her food around her plate, her appetite gone. She laughed at the right moments, nodded when spoken to, but her mind was elsewhere, caught in a loop of doubt she couldn't shake. After dinner, when coats were fetched and goodbyes exchanged, Vincent lingered near the door. Nancy avoided his gaze, busying herself with dishes, her smile fixed and brittle. Drive safe, she heard him say to her parents. Then softer, Nancy. She didn't look up. Night, Vincent. And just like that, the thread snapped. Later, in her apartment, Nancy sat on the couch, the ornament glinting on the coffee table like a question she couldn't answer. She hated how much the comment had gotten under her skin. It wasn't Vincent's fault, he hadn't said it. But the implication gnawed at her anyway. She wanted a partner who chose her, not someone who showed up because their mothers thought it was nice. Nancy stared at her phone, Vincent's last message still glowing on the screen. Thought I'd see if you wanted to grab coffee sometime. She'd said yes. She'd meant it. But now, doubt whispered like wind under a door. Was she reading too much into this? Or not enough? The next morning, her phone buzzed. Vincent. Vincent. Hope yesterday wasn't too chaotic. Want to take a walk later? Park should look amazing in the snow. Nancy stared at the message, her chest tight. She typed back slowly. Nancy. Busy today. Maybe another time. She set the phone down, her stomach sinking even as she hit send. Chapter 10 Clearing the air. Nancy spent the morning buried in work, but her thoughts kept circling back to that message. Vincent's simple invitation. Her curt reply. Busy today. Maybe another time. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. She wasn't busy. She was avoiding him. Avoiding what exactly? A conversation? Possibility? Or the risk that she'd misread everything? By late afternoon, the sky had turned a bruised gray, snow drifting lazily past her window. Nancy closed her laptop and stared at the ornament on her coffee table, its silver surface catching the dim light. It looked like a promise, and right now it felt like a weight. Her phone buzzed. Vincent again. Vincent, if I said I was outside your building with coffee, would that be weird? Nancy blinked, her heart thudding. She crossed to the window and sure enough, there he was, standing on the sidewalk, bundled in a dark coat, 2 cups in his hands, snow dusting his hair like frost. Nancy's breath caught. She grabbed her coat and headed downstairs before logic could stop her. The cold hit her like a slap when she stepped outside, but Vincent's smile warmed her instantly. He held out a cup. Peppermint mocha. Thought you might need it. Nancy accepted it, fingers brushing his, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the heat of the cup and the steadiness in his eyes. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to, Vincent said simply. Nancy swallowed hard. About yesterday? Yeah, Vincent said, his tone calm but firm. We should talk. He gestured toward the park across the street, its paths dusted with snow, lampposts glowing like candles. Nancy nodded, and they walked in silence until they reached a bench under a bare oak tree. Vincent sat, turning to face her. I feel like something changed after dinner. Nancy stared at the snow clinging to her boots. Your mom said you were keeping me company. Her voice was quiet, but the words felt heavy. It sounded like this was all obligation. Vincent was silent for a beat, then exhaled slowly. Nancy, if I were here out of obligation, I wouldn't be sitting in the cold with you right now. Nancy looked up, startled by the quiet conviction in his voice. Vincent's gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. I'm here because I want to be, because I like talking to you, because I think you're smart and funny and stubborn in the best way. And because, he paused, his breath clouding in the chill, because I'd like to see where this goes. Nancy's chest tightened, her pulse thudding in her ears. You mean that? Vincent's smile was faint but certain. I don't say things I don't mean. Nancy searched his face, looking for cracks, for hesitation, but there was none. Just calm honesty, like sunlight breaking through clouds. She laughed softly, the sound shaky but real. I guess I overthought things. Vincent's mouth curved. You? Overthink? Shocking. Nancy rolled her eyes, but her smile lingered. I've always believed in actions. Words are easy. Then let me prove it, Vincent said quietly. Nancy blinked. How? Vincent stood, offering his hand. Start by letting me walk you home. Then maybe dinner tomorrow. No snowstorms, no family obligations. Just us. Nancy stared at his hand, her breath catching. It was such a simple gesture, and yet, it felt like everything she'd been waiting for. She placed her hand in his, and warmth spread through her like fire chasing frost. Okay, she said softly. Dinner tomorrow. Vincent's smile deepened, slow and certain. Good. They walked back through the snow, their steps in sync, their silence comfortable. And for the first time in a long time, Nancy felt something she trusted. Not fate, not fantasy, but choice. Her choice. His choice. The start of something real. Chapter 11 The Choice. Nancy woke the next morning to a sky washed in pale gold, sunlight glinting off rooftops still crusted with snow. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, her thoughts weren't tangled in statistics or caution. They were clear, sharp, and startlingly simple. She had said yes. Dinner tonight. Just the two of them. No family obligations, no festive chaos, just a choice. Her choice. Nancy sat at her kitchen table, nursing coffee, staring at the ornament Vincent had given her. It caught the light like a shard of winter, delicate and deliberate. That was what struck her most. Not the beauty of it, but the intention behind it. He hadn't picked something generic from a store shelf. He'd thought about her, about what mattered to her. Actions. Not words. Nancy traced the engraved initials with her fingertip, her chest tightening. For years, she told herself she wasn't chasing love, wasn't waiting for fate to swoop in with fireworks and grand gestures. She wanted something real, solid, partnership built on choice, not need. And now, here was Vincent, quiet, steady Vincent, offering exactly that. Not promises, not poetry, just presence, just honesty. Nancy exhaled slowly, a laugh slipping out, soft, incredulous. Well, she murmured to the empty room, looks like you found your unicorn. The day crawled and raced all at once. Nancy worked, answered emails, even met Claire for a quick coffee, enduring her friend's relentless teasing with a smile that felt different now, lighter, freer. Dinner tonight? Claire asked, eyes gleaming. Tell me you're wearing something that says, festive but not desperate. Nancy rolled her eyes. I've got it handled. Claire grinned. You're glowing. Nancy laughed. It's the caffeine. But as she walked home through streets strung with lights, snow crunching under her boots, she knew it wasn't caffeine. It was something else, something that felt like possibility. By evening, Nancy stood in front of her closet, debating between two sweaters like the fate of nations depended on it. She chose deep burgundy, warm, understated, and paired it with dark jeans and boots. Simple, comfortable, hers. When Vincent texted, outside when you're ready, her pulse ticked faster, but not with panic, with anticipation. She grabbed her coat, slipped the ornament into her bag without thinking, and headed downstairs. Vincent was waiting by his car, snow dusting the shoulders of his charcoal coat. He looked up as she approached, his smile slow and certain, and Nancy felt something settle inside her, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Ready? He asked. Nancy nodded. Ready. The restaurant was small and warm, tucked on a quiet street, its windows glowing like lanterns. Inside, candles flickered on tables, and the scent of rosemary and roasted garlic curled through the air. They ordered wine, shared plates, and really talked. About work, about family, about the things that mattered and the things that didn't. Vincent listened the way he always did, fully, without rushing to fill silences. And when he spoke, his words carried weight, like stones dropped into still water. At one point, Nancy asked, "Why now?" Vincent's brow furrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" "You've known me for years," Nancy said, her voice steady but curious. "Why now?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, then said, "Because before it wasn't the right time. You had your plans. I had mine. But now," he met her gaze, his eyes calm and clear. "Now it feels like the right choice." Nancy's breath caught, not at the words themselves, but at the way he said them. Not fate, not luck, choice. She smiled, slow and certain. "I like that answer." Vincent's mouth curved. "Good." After dinner, they walked through streets strung with lights, their breath clouding in the cold. Snowflakes drifted lazily, catching in Vincent's hair, and Nancy felt something bloom in her chest. Quiet, steady, undeniable. She didn't believe in soulmates. She didn't believe in destiny. But she believed in this, in him, in the simple, deliberate act of choosing. When they reached her building, Vincent turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "Nancy." She looked up, her pulse ticking faster. "I'm not asking for forever," he said softly. "Just the chance to see where this goes." Nancy stared at him, the words settling like snow, light, gentle, but with weight beneath. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't hesitate. She didn't calculate risks or run statistics in her head. She just chose. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "Let's see." Vincent's smile deepened, slow and certain. And when his hand brushed hers, warm against the winter chill, Nancy felt something she trusted. Not fate, not fantasy. Choice. Chapter 12, Christmas Eve Confession. Christmas Eve arrived draped in silver and gold, the city glowing under strings of lights that shimmered like stars fallen to earth. Nancy stood in her parents' living room, adjusting a ribbon on the tree, the scent of pine and cinnamon curling through the air. Outside, snow drifted lazily, soft as whispers. The house was warm with laughter, her parents chatting in the kitchen, carols humming from the stereo, but Nancy's thoughts were elsewhere. On Vincent, on the quiet certainty in his voice when he'd said, "I'd like to see where this goes." On the way her own heart had answered before her head could interfere. She hadn't told Claire yet. She hadn't told anyone. It felt too new, too fragile, like a flame cupped in her hands, steady but vulnerable to the slightest gust. Nancy was looping the last ribbon when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, and there he was, Vincent, framed by the glow of the tree, his dark coat dusted with snow, his eyes catching the light like polished steel. "Hey," he said softly. Nancy smiled, her pulse ticking faster. "Hey." He held up a small box, wrapped in deep green paper and tied with a silver bow. "For you." Nancy blinked. "Vincent, you already gave me." "This one's different," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Open it." Nancy set the ribbon aside and took the box, her fingers brushing his. She untied the bow, peeled back the paper, and lifted the lid. Inside was a keychain, A simple leather loop with a tiny silver charm shaped like a compass. Nancy stared at it, her breath catching. It's beautiful. Vincent's smile was faint, almost self-conscious. Thought you might like it. You said you believe in choices, not fate. The compass felt, right? Nancy swallowed hard, her chest tightening. Vincent. He stepped closer, his voice steady now. I meant what I said the other night. I'm not here because of family or convenience. I'm here because I choose to be. Because I choose you. The words landed like snow. Soft, quiet, but with weight beneath. Nancy felt them settle deep, melting walls she hadn't realized she'd built. She laughed softly, the sound shaky but real. You know, I don't believe in grand gestures. Vincent's mouth curved. Good. I'm not great at those. Nancy smiled, her eyes stinging unexpectedly. But I do believe in actions. Vincent reached for her hand, his fingers warm against hers. Then let this be one. Nancy looked at him, really looked, and saw everything she'd been waiting for. Not perfection. Not fantasy. Just a man who stood on his own, who didn't need her but chose her anyway. She squeezed his hand, her voice steady. Then let this be mine. Vincent's smile deepened, slow and certain, and when he leaned in, just enough for his forehead to rest against hers, the world felt quiet, like the hush after snowfall. No fireworks, no fate, just choice. And for Nancy, that was everything. Chapter 13, a new tradition. Christmas morning dawned quiet and white, the world outside Nancy's window shimmering under a fresh layer of snow. Inside, the tree glowed softly, its ornaments catching the light like tiny stars. Nancy stood in her kitchen, wrapping her hands around a mug of coffee, her thoughts warm and steady. Last night replayed in fragments. The compass keychain resting in her palm, Vincent's voice low and certain. The simple truth of his words. I choose you. No fireworks, no sweeping declarations. Just choice. And for Nancy, that was everything. Her phone buzzed. A message from Vincent. Vincent, morning. Hope Santa treated you well. Want to take a walk? Nancy smiled, her pulse ticking faster. Not with nerves, but with something quieter, deeper. She typed back, Nancy, give me 10 minutes. The park was hushed under snow, lampposts draped in garlands, benches dusted white. Nancy spotted Vincent near the frozen pond, his dark coat stark against the pale world, his breath curling in the cold. He turned as she approached, his smile slow and certain, and Nancy felt that now familiar warmth settle in her chest. Morning, he said. Morning, Nancy replied, tucking her hands into her pockets. Beautiful out here. Vincent glanced around, his eyes thoughtful. Feels like the world hit pause. Nancy laughed softly. I could get used to that. They walked in easy silence, their boots crunching over snow, until Vincent stopped near a cluster of evergreens strung with lights. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small box, unwrapped this time, simple and plain. Nancy raised a brow. Another gift? Vincent's smile was faint, almost shy. Not exactly. More like a tradition. Nancy blinked. A tradition? Vincent opened the box, revealing a tiny silver ornament shaped like a compass, just like the keychain, but smaller, delicate, meant for a tree. Every year, he said quietly. One ornament. Something that means something. Something that lasts. Nancy stared at the ornament, her chest tightening. It wasn't grand. It wasn't flashy. It was deliberate, intentional, an action, not a word. She laughed softly, her voice catching. You really thought this through. Vincent's gaze held hers, steady and warm. I told you, I'm not great at grand gestures, but I can do this. Nancy swallowed hard, her fingers brushing the cool silver. I love it. Vincent smiled, slow and certain. Good, because I was hoping you'd help me hang it. They walked back to her parents' house, the ornament nestled in Nancy's pocket like a promise. Inside, the tree glowed in the corner, its branches heavy with ribbons and lights. Nancy stood on tiptoe to find the perfect spot, Vincent steadying the branch as she looped the silver string. When it was done, they stepped back, shoulder to shoulder, and looked at the tiny compass glinting among the lights. A new tradition, Vincent said softly. Nancy smiled, her heart full. Our tradition. He turned to her then, his expression thoughtful, his voice low. Nancy. She looked up, her breath catching. I don't know where this road leads, Vincent said, but I know I want to walk it with you. Nancy felt the words settle deep, like snow melting into earth. She didn't answer right away, not because she doubted, but because she wanted to hold the moment, to feel its weight. Then she reached for his hand, her fingers threading through his, and smiled. A smile that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Then let's walk, she said simply. Vincent's smile deepened, and when he leaned in, just enough for his forehead to rest against hers, the world felt quiet, like the hush after snowfall. No fate, no fantasy, just choice. And for Nancy, that was everything.